and then people not being able to continue.
We have spoken to some of those fishermen, and there was a suggestion that the rules might be relaxed a bit, particularly on things like weight.
Yes, so there have been negotiations as a result of the potential damaging effects of bringing in that legislation. The government seems to be rowing back and being a bit more pragmatic. So in terms of other challenges for the industry at the moment, the shellfish industry are really experiencing the direct impacts of climate change. We've seen mass die-offs and moribund animals, particularly down in the southeast coast, and that's really a big concern, something that we would probably expect to see occurring more commonly going forward in the future.
Given that collection of very different challenges, particularly of course climate, how does the future look?
So the seascape is going to change. Species are going to change their distribution, and that means that fishermen are going to have to try and adjust to that. What we're going to see in the future are more southerly species coming into our waters. That opens up some opportunities for potential new business, but we're going to see more northerly species retreating, and cold water species will not perform so well in warmer waters.
This comes after a very difficult time on the trade front because of rules on things like bivalves once we'd left the EU. Will businesses survive all of this?
So the legislative challenges after we left the EU have been extremely damaging for UK shellfish businesses. Trading with our neighbours has become very difficult, particularly if you are in the live shellfish market. Other parts of the industry, of course, which are reliant on frozen products are less negatively affected. But for the bivalve shellfish sector, so oysters and mussels, the differences in legislative requirements between the UK and Europe has been a real problem, and we have lost some really sustainable fishing businesses, and we're losing the potential for a really exciting and potentially huge area of expansion for the shellfish industry going forward.
Is there any good news?
Well, I think that is the good news. The good news is the marine environment far exceeds our land mass. So if we're going to ramp up sustainable food production in the UK, the sea is where we should be looking. What we need to do is to be looking to remove the potential barriers, particularly around legislation and testing in our waters, to make sure that they are aligned with our neighbours so that we are not actually strangling our own industry.
Professor Michael Kaiser from Heriot-Watt University. More on shellfish all week. A destructive and disproportionate attack. That's landowners' reaction to the Scottish Government's new land reform bill. It, says the bill, the third in the past 20 years or so, will empower communities. The proposed legislation would mean that the sale of estates of more than 1,000 hectares could be stopped by ministers and split into smaller lots, and the owners of large estates would have to show how they use the land and how that contributes to key policies like net zero. The Rural Affairs Secretary, Marie Goujon, says big estates cover 50% of Scotland, and we do not think it's right that ownership and control of much of Scotland's land is still in the hands of relatively few people. She goes on, this bill sets out ambitious proposals to allow the benefits and opportunities of Scotland's land to be more widely shared. Well, that view is not shared by Scottish Land and Estates, which represents landowners. Sarah Jane Lang is Chief Executive.
So I appreciate the Scottish Government seems to have an ideological viewpoint about ownership, but in reality they're trying to reach the most ambitious climate change targets in Europe, planting targets, peatland restoration, all of which is happening by Scottish landowners. So with one hand they are applauding and supporting Scottish landowners, and the other way they're attacking it through land reform. So they seem to have a very sort of split personality when it comes to Scottish land, and the land reform does seem to be driven by ideology rather than policy rationale.
But from a practical point of view, if you're selling an estate and it had to be offered in smaller lots, that wouldn't have an impact on all the work you've just talked about, would it? That would be able to continue. It would just mean that more people could get involved, which the Scottish Government says is going to be better long term.
No, absolutely not. So when you look at the evidence both from the Scottish Government and other studies, it shows that scale is really important. So in terms of peatland restoration, planting, indeed even new housing, the best way to deliver some of that is at scale. So as soon as you start looking at fragmentation of ownership, it impacts on the scale and viability of those projects. But it also, we're talking actually about the government being able to split into lots, a hill farm. So if you think about, how fragile those are already, if you split up a sheep farming unit in the uplands, because the Scottish Government decides it's too big, that's not going to produce 10 viable farming units for new entrants.
Well, all because the Scottish Government can do it doesn't mean that they would in every case, does it? Now, the other thing that they're talking about is landowners having to show how they use their land and how that contributes to key policies like net zero if they own these large estates. What sort of impact would that have on your members?
I actually think that's a really important and positive move. In Scotland, we talk about the well-being economy, so how businesses can contribute to people, jobs and nature. Land-based businesses are actually very well placed to share the good news stories about the homes they're providing, the renewable energy, and over 70% of Scotland's renewable energy is actually generated on rural estates. So there's actually a really good news story there, and I actually think the land management plans will be a way to help communicate that to a much wider audience.
If this bill goes through exactly as is, what will that mean for people who own these large estates?
So I suppose it's twofold. It's not just about those people who own now, it's about people who are looking to invest in Scotland. So I've already had conversations with people who are being courted by the Scottish Government, inward investment in terms of natural capital, who say that because of the risk of fragmentation when they go to sell the estates on, they just won't buy the land. They won't buy the land, they won't restore the peat, they won't plant the trees. For those people who currently own estates and farms, that was thinking, where will this end? Where will this interference in private property end? Because although the government is saying it's 1,000 hectares, the bill actually gives them powers to reduce that without coming back to primary legislation. So it's a real concern, it's a lack of trust. This retrospective meddling in people's property rights is something that really concerns landowners of all sizes in Scotland.
Sarah Jane Lang from Scottish Land and Estates. The government's farm business incomes forecast for this year makes grim reading. In England, dairy farmers are expected to earn 78% less than last year, largely due to falls in the milk price. Cereal farmers face a 77% cut, though prices have been high, and DEFRA says the fall reflects a return to more normal levels, as well as a reduction in the amount of arable crops grown, while mixed farms will see a 49% cut in income. Only those grazing livestock or rearing pigs are expected to see their income rise, and there's no forecast for the poultry sector, as DEFRA says there is too much uncertainty. David Exwood is Deputy President of the National Farmers Union.
These figures are really alarming and just show the volatility that we've all been talking about for the last 2 years. Big rises in costs, coming at a time of dropping direct payments, and then you've got the wet weather that we're all experiencing this winter. On top of that, it's no wonder farmers are feeling under pressure.
Do you think this will result in some going bust and some choosing to leave?
I think it will. Certainly we're going to see less area planted with crops this year. We see that. We're going to see farmers pulling back. I think it will lead to less food being produced. And yes, of course, this kind of volatility, for some people, will walk away from the industry. There's no doubt about it.
Does that matter in a sense? Because in most cases, other farms will just expand into that space.
No, I think, again, if you look at the areas of crop planted this year, we're seeing some significant drops. And this is why we talk about the food security index. We're going to see this play through in 12 months' time in the amount of food being produced in this country, and that does matter. And that's why, we talk about in our election ask, having a budget that addresses food production, not just the environment.
Although the government will point out that there is money on offer for the environment for reasons, and that most food is actually grown in quite a small percentage of land, so there's plenty of space for that nature recovery.
But we need space for nature, of course we do, but we need measures that address the volatility of food production, and we don't have that. There's no stability measure in current government policy, and we really need to see that. The direct payments, whatever you thought of them, they provided that stability. With that stability gone, you're going to see income figures like this go up and down, and that will drive people away from the industry, and we need measures that will put an element of stability back.
Do you think that because we have very different approaches in the different parts of the UK, that is going to start showing as well?
Yes, I think it will. We have seen very different policies across the UK, and they will have different outcomes. There's no doubt about that. The important thing is that every policy should address food production.
We have seen farmers protesting over the past few weeks. Given these pressures, are you expecting more of that?
I think this is really why farmers feel under pressure, and That's why they want to protest. You know, they know how much money's in their bank accounts. They know what it looks like going forward, and that's partly why they want to protest.
And is the NFU supportive of that?
We understand why people want to protest, but we need to be really clear. If you're going to protest, is what we're asking for, and that also protests. You know, we must not lose public support, and it's very easy to lose the backing of the British people, and we do feel we have that at the moment. We must keep them on side.
David Exwood from the NFU. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The studio manager in Bristol is Susie Robbins, and the producer for BBC Audio in Bristol is Rebecca Rooney. Now over to the BBC Weather Centre for the Farming Today 5-day forecast.
And it's a very good morning again from me, Chris Hawkes. Looking at the weather picture over the next few days, generally I think the weather is going to stay on the mild side. There will be some rain around at times. Now, this morning we've got a few showers that will be pushing eastwards across the country, but otherwise some bright or sunny spells develop widely, and it's going to be very mild. Temperatures widely between around 13 and 16 degrees Celsius. However, we are going to see some rain move into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland as we go on into the afternoon. And there'll be some fairly brisk winds here, gusts running into the 40s of miles an hour. So we'll be turning unsettled across northwestern areas. The rain here is associated with a front, and overnight tonight that front will push eastwards across the UK, bringing many areas outbreaks of rain, although not really very much falling across East Anglia and South East England. On into Tuesday, we start off with a few patches of rain then left over from those weather fronts. They'll be pushing eastwards with time, and generally as we go through Tuesday, the weather will tend to turn a bit drier and brighter, with sunny spells breaking through. It's going to be another mild day. Scotland and Northern Ireland 10 to 12 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. England and Wales 13 to 16 degrees. The average at this time of year is around 10 to 12, so for many areas it will be on the mild side. Heading into Wednesday, this is probably going to be the wettest day of the week as low pressure moves in. Weather fronts will bring outbreaks of rain. Rain can be quite heavy at times. And the rain will probably tend to ease away from Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day, so at least the weather should turn a bit drier and brighter here. Temperatures 9 to 11 for Scotland and Northern Ireland, so quite close to average. England and Wales still on the mild side, 12 to 16 degrees. Heading into Thursday, we're looking at quite a windy day with gales and outbreaks of rain across northwestern areas of the country, little if anything reaching East Anglia and South East England. Still mild, temperature around 13 to 15 degrees across the whole of the UK. But heading into Friday, the winds turn to a northwesterly direction. Plenty of showers around, some of those could have some hail mixed in. A gusty day, with temperatures coming down to between 10 and 14. Lisa.
Thanks, Chris. The Today programme is coming up after 6 with Christina and Katie Adler. Later at 9, Start the Week discusses murder, intrigue and disinformation with Ukraine's most celebrated novelist Andrei Kirkov, the journalist Peter Polantsev, and the technology expert Charlotte G. Now then, Tweet of the Day, Chris Plackham presents a surface-feeding duck, the shoveler.
Swimming in circles, their huge beaks trawling the surface, shovelers do the job of baleen whales on our lakes and ponds. I am particularly fond of the shoveler. Not only is it a very handsome duck, but also it has a lovely habit of swimming round and round in circles with its head underwater. So, if you can't see its very distinctive bill, you can identify it by its bizarre swimming action. If you get a good view of that shovel bill, you'll notice the large flanges on each side of it. These are used to strain small creatures in the same way that whales, such as the blue whale, sift plankton through their baleen plates. Duck shovelers are brown, much like other female ducks, but the drake has a striking harlequin pattern, including a glossy green head, chestnut sides and a pure white breast. When they fly, both male and female shovelers have a sky blue patch on their wings that shows up well in flight, and along with the spoon-shaped bill makes them unmistakable. Shovelers are rather scarce breeding birds of marshes and shallow lakes, but in winter our population is boosted by continental birds. They're rather shy though, and you're not likely to see them taking bread in the park lake.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Monday, the 18th of March. This is Today with Justin Webb and Katie Adler.
The headlines this morning: Vladimir Putin says he's won the Russian presidential election, which has been described by Western nations as a sham. Israel has launched another military operation around Gaza's largest hospital, where it says Hamas fighters have regrouped. And also today's programme, should we be mining the deep sea floor for the rare earth metals that we need to fuel the modern economy?
These metals do exist on land, but in decreasing numbers, so the best ones have already been mined. We should be carrying out extractive industries in parts of the planet with the least flag, not the most flag.
There's another question. Has the graffiti artist Banksy struck again, this time spray painting foliage on a wall behind a severely pruned tree? Plus, we're out in the River Avon looking for beavers, and they're not that easy to spot.
Oh yes, it's after. It's an otter. Oh, so you can see it's got its long tail and flat tail. I can't believe I feel vaguely disappointed to see an otter.
BBC News is read by Lisa Costa.
Vladimir Putin has thanked Russians for their trust and support after claiming victory in the country's presidential election. With all his main opponents either dead, in prison or banned from standing, a fifth term for President Putin was seen as inevitable. Many Western nations, including the US and UK, have condemned the poll as a sham. But Mr. Putin said the results demonstrated people's trust in Russia's current path, and he promised to strengthen the country's military. From Moscow, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg sent this report.
Having been told he'd won 87% of the vote, it's no surprise that Vladimir Putin was sounding confident, defiant. Addressing supporters, he said no matter how hard anyone tried to scare or suppress Russia's will or consciousness, they would never succeed. In an election controlled by the Kremlin, a landslide for Vladimir Putin is no surprise, but it is important for Putin. He can now claim he has a popular mandate for the war in Ukraine and for his transformation of Russia into an increasingly militaristic society.
The Israeli military says it's launched what it called a precise operation in parts of Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Eyewitnesses have reported hearing gunshots and explosions. An IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, claimed Hamas had regrouped inside the hospital but insisted Israel would keep Palestinians safe.
Our war is against Hamas, not against the people of Gaza, which is why we will conduct this operation with caution and care, while ensuring that the hospital continues its important functions. We will also be conducting a humanitarian effort to provide food, water, and other supplies to the patients and civilians.
The bill returns to the Commons today after hitting a roadblock in the House of Lords earlier this month. He has put forward 10 amendments to the bill, which aims to give the government power to deport some asylum seekers to the East African country. Ministers will try to overturn the proposed changes this week. Our political correspondent Leila Nathal reports.
After the Supreme Court ruled the Rwanda plan was unlawful, the government brought forward legislation to try to prevent further legal challenges. When it was first debated in the Commons, the bill exposed divisions among Conservative MPs, with some concerned it had gone too far and others claiming it was not strong enough to work. The Lords then made a number of changes, including to prevent victims of modern slavery and those who'd supported British troops overseas being removed. The revised bill now comes back to MPs. The government is not expected to accept any of the 10 Lords amendments, which would pave the way for yet another showdown with peers this week.
The spending watchdog has warned that a low uptake of heat pumps is slowing progress on cutting emissions from homes, saying sales will have to increase 11-fold if the government is to achieve its climate change targets. Ministers want to install 600,000 low-carbon heat pumps each year by 2028. But a National Audit Office report says that's optimistic, as Esme Stallard explains.
Installing heat pumps could considerably reduce greenhouse gases produced from home heating, which are currently responsible for nearly a fifth of the UK's planet warming emissions. The Audit Office looked at the current rate of heat pump sales and concluded existing government policies were unlikely to increase these significantly. It said the government needs to raise public awareness of the green technology, and ministers need to make a decision on whether hydrogen could play a role in heating our homes. In response, the government said it was helping families to install heat pumps, rather than forcing them to.
A 5-mile section of the M25 in Surrey, which was shut this weekend, reopened last night, 8 hours ahead of schedule. It was the first planned daytime closure of the motorway since it opened in 1986. A new report suggests the number of visits to tourist attractions in the UK remains below pre-pandemic levels. The Association of Leading Visitor Attractions said there were 147 million visits to major venues last year. That's 11% down on the 164 million visits in 2019. The trade body believes many people have become used to not going out. The British-born screenwriter David Seidler, best known for his Oscar and BAFTA-winning writing on the film The King's Speech, has died. He was aged 86. The 2010 film, starring Colin Firth, followed the true story of how King George VI overcame a speech impediment. David Seidler dedicated his Oscar to those who also had the disorder, including himself.
I accept this on behalf of all the stutterers throughout the world. We have a voice. We have been heard. Thanks to you, the Academy.
David Seidler.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Now for the weather forecast, it's over to Chris Fawkes at the BBC Weather Centre.
Hi Katia, thanks a lot. And looking at the weather picture today, generally the weather is going to be on the mild side thanks to southwesterly winds, but there will be a bit of rain around at times. We'll take a look at the details for the weather Wales back. degrees in Newcastle, Cardiff and Birmingham, 15 for Norwich, and London gets up to 16 degrees. Average in London at this time of year is 12, so well above the March average. For Northern Ireland, it's going to be a bright start to the day with some sunny spells. However, through the morning it will tend to cloud over, with outbreaks of rain arriving through the afternoon. Now the rain could turn quite heavy for a time. Gusty winds, gusts running into the 40s of miles an hour. Temperatures still on the mild side though, highs of around 12 or 13 degrees for Northern Ireland today. In Scotland, a weak weather front will bring a few patches of rain, mainly across western areas initially. That weather front weakens whilst pushing eastwards. I suppose you could see an odd spit of rain across eastern Scotland late morning. That clears and then sunshine comes out for most of Scotland, so for many it's going to be a fine afternoon with temperatures up to 14 degrees Celsius, so very mild really. But for the far west of Scotland, it turns cloudy late in the day with 8 outbreaks of rain arriving as we head towards the evening time. That's how the weather's looking.
Chris, thank you. 8 minutes past 6. That's our first look at the papers. A number of the front pages continuing to focus on rumours at Westminster about the Prime Minister's leadership from within the Conservative Party. The Telegraph reports that Rishi Sunak is urging MPs to stick with him, and that he's issued a rallying cry to backbenchers, telling them the economy is turning a corner and that 2024 will be the year that Britain bounces back. The paper says Mr Sunak was forced to speak out after days of speculation that right-wing Conservatives were lining up the Commons leader Penny Mordaunt to replace him.
The Mail says Mr Sunak's allies are furious that Miss Mordaunt has failed to distance herself from recent reports that she's being lined up as a unity candidate. The Express quotes the Minister Esther McVey saying that some colleagues are putting leadership ambitions ahead of the party's interests, and that plotting to topple the Prime Minister is self-indulgence.
The front page of the Telegraph and the Times carry a photograph of the widow of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny at a protest in Germany against the re-election of Vladimir Putin as Russian president. The Times reports that Yulia Navalny defaced her own ballot paper, adding in her late husband's name. In an interview with the Telegraph, the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps tells the paper Mr Putin is behaving like a modern-day Stalin and describes him as a tyrant that the West must stand up to.
The NHS Ombudsman Rob Behrens has told The Guardian that hospitals are bearing evidence about poor care in a cover-up culture that leads to avoidable deaths and families being denied the truth about their loved ones. Mr Behrens, who, standing down from the post he's held for 7 years, also claims many parts of the NHS put reputation management ahead of being open with relatives, and that too little is being done to end the victimisation of staff, he says, who turned whistleblower.
The front page of the iPaper reveals that Fujitsu, the IT company at the centre of the Post Office Horizon scandal, is still managing a highly classified British military computer system, despite having lost the contract to do so in 2022. The paper says it's because of delays in vetting replacement contractors.
Dark Ages Dentistry is the headline in the Mirror. It reports that there'll be a protest at Parliament today about the crisis in the sector, which it says has left patients taking out their own teeth with pliers or screwdrivers. The paper says more than 200,000 people have signed its petition for better dental care, sharing their horror stories from across the country.
And the Sun's front page reports that the Princess of Wales was spotted out and about at a farm shop in Windsor over the weekend, and what it describes as wild speculation about her health on social media. And the front page of the Mail carries a photo of the King and reports that he hopes to attend the Trooping of the Colour in the middle of June, but the paper says Charles may travel by carriage rather than taking part on horseback.
It's 10 minutes past 6, and today the United Nations International Seabed Association begins a new round of talks in Kingston, Jamaica, aimed at agreeing a regulatory framework allowing companies to mine the floor of the world's oceans for rare earth materials needed for our mobile phones and laptops, and things key for the stride for energy transition, like wind turbine blades and batteries for electric cars. Justin Rolat is our climate editor. Justin, this is an age-old row, isn't it, whether or not to mine the deep ocean, but the pressure is on, right? Not just from companies, but countries like China and most recently the US.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's age-old. It's been going on for a few years. The technology is quite new to be able to get these metals, and the metals are lying in kind of potato-sized nodules on the floor of the deep ocean, so below about 4,000 meters, and they contain a mix. They're called polymetallic nodules, and they contain a mix of metals including nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, all of which, as you say, are used in battery technologies. The problem, of course, is that sending machines down effectively to hoover these up, which is what the mining companies want to do, will destroy the ecosystem, certainly in the environment where the immediate environment where the machines are. And that's the issue for the Greens, who say, look, this is one of the few pristine, perhaps the only pristine environment left on Earth, and we shouldn't be sending machines down there to collect metals from there as well. For their part, the mining companies say, listen, the abyssal plains are vast. They're 40% of the surface of the Earth. Land is just 29%, so bigger, significantly bigger than the area of land, and we only want to mine a small area, and it's crucial for the green transition. So you've got this interesting paradox. Both the Greens and the mining companies say they're acting on behalf of the best interests of the planet.
And in the meantime, Justin, Greenpeace faces being thrown out of the International Seabed Association in its observer capacity, right? Can you briefly tell us how likely that is and why?
Sure. Well, it's hard to assess how likely it is. I think on balance it probably is quite unlikely, but one of the mining companies, it's a company called the Metals Company, had a research trip into the remote Pacific Ocean. They had one of these big boats up there, and Greenpeace sailed their vessel to the boat, boarded the boat, according to the mining company, therefore disrupting the scientific research that they've been ordered to undertake as part of an impact assessment for the International Seabed Authority. The Seabed Authority is upset because they're kind of interfering with the science that would allow them to make a fair assessment of the impact on the ground. The Greenpeace say, look, it was a peaceful protest, and it was justified because the Metals Company wants to apply for a licence before regulations have been agreed.
And we'll be catching up with this debate in more detail later in the programme today. Justin Rolat, thanks so much.
13 minutes past 6, Manchester Airport must be part of a faster rail line linking cities across the north of England. That according to a new report that comes out today. Sean is here with that, and indeed the rest of the business news for not just the Manchester and the north, but the rest of us too, Sean.
Absolutely, although it is pretty crucial after HS2's northern leg was scrapped, just in people wondering where money was going to go. Instead, we've been told by the government money being earmarked for other what are less expensive transport projects. One plan has been for this hugely important rail link connecting the cities of Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds. And a report by the engineering consultant Arup says having Manchester Airport at the heart of this rail link would see tens of thousands more jobs created in the decades to come. I've got Chris Woodruff with me, who's the managing director at Manchester Airport. Morning, Chris. Good morning. Before we discuss other options, can you put into perspective how much the scrapping of large chunks of HS2 has affected Manchester Airport's ambitions, the region's growth prospects?
I think the HS2 decisions made and where our focus is on that connection between the west to the east of the north of England, and what Arup have said is that would be incredibly beneficial for the northern economy. Our gross value added today is 5.7